If your daughter is lying unconscious on the floor, whispering in a daze, "The teacher did it again," what would you do? A mother begins to follow the small signs: an untouched lunchbox, averted eyes, and childish words that make it seem like it's all her fault. The deeper she goes, the more she uncovers a classroom where discipline is used as punishment and silence becomes a tool to make children disappear. This is the journey of a mother finding her daughter's voice again, and the voices of children who have never been named. Winter clouds hung low, threatening to fall upon the town of Elkridge. The streets were deserted, save for the sound of tires swerving across the cold, wet asphalt, reflecting the pale yellow streetlights. Jenna Riley arrived at the end of Grant Street a little after 5 in the afternoon, so exhausted that she forgot to turn off the car as soon as she parked in front of her house. Her blue clapboard house, nestled beside a row of gaunt elm trees, was as quiet as ever. But as Jenna approached, something felt subtly off. The front door was ajar. No wind. No one outside. Everything around her was buried in a suspicious stillness. Jenna entered, her footsteps hesitant on the cold wooden floor, as she called out, "Abby." No reply. The kitchen light was on. On the table, a cookie jar stood open, half finished, a few crumbs scattered on the floor. A stuffed fox, Abby's inseparable friend, lay tossed beside the sofa leg. Jenna moved closer, her heart clenching as she saw a small hand dangling from behind the back of the sofa. "Abby?" She rounded the sofa, dropping to her knees. Her daughter, 9 years old, was curled up in a ball. Her face was as pale as diluted milk, her lips a faint purple, her eyelashes fluttering as if fighting off a delirium. Her head rested against the leg of the sofa. Her eyes were partly open, but her gaze was empty, as if no one was home. A vague, almost absurd thought flickered through Jenna's mind. Had she been sitting there for a long time? There was no TV sound, no familiar background music that Abby always played while doing her homework. The whole house felt drained of life. No sound, no warmth. Only a thick silence that was tightening around everything. Jenna lifted her daughter's head, her hands fumbling to check her pulse on her tiny wrist. The pulse was weak, trembling like an overstretched thread. Abby murmured something unintelligible, then her mouth opened slightly again. A whisper escaped her lips, blurred like condensation. "The teacher did it again." Jenna froze. Her hand went rigid on her daughter's chest. She didn't ask again. Couldn't. Didn't have time. Her other hand grabbed her phone. The screen trembled beneath her sweaty fingers. She dialed 911 and, immediately after, the number for the Elkridge Town Police. The two calls ran parallel, like two blood vessels throbbing wildly in her head. "Ambulance and police. My daughter!" Jenna choked, her voice breaking. "She's unconscious, her face is white as a sheet." She just said, "The teacher did it again. I don't know who. Please, immediately." She knelt beside her daughter, one arm around Abby, the other hand gripping the phone tightly. She tried to keep Abby from getting any colder, from sinking any deeper into her daze. Her knees ached from the hard wooden floor, but she felt nothing except the feeling that Abby was becoming lighter and lighter in her arms. She whispered constantly, "Honey, it's Mommy. Mommy's here. Can you hear me?" No response, only a faint breath. In that moment, Jenna saw again the image of Abby from that morning, wearing her purple hoodie, sitting at the table nibbling on cereal, still wrinkling her nose at the cold milk, still giggling because the stuffed fox had been sat on, just 10 hours ago. In her confusion, Jenna's memory raced back to recent weeks. Once, Abby said she was ravenously hungry, even though the lunchbox she'd prepared was still untouched. Another day, She startled awake in the middle of the night, mumbling, "I'm not done with the reading." Small details, which she had dismissed. It's probably just because of the new teacher, she'd reassured herself. Maybe she's just growing up, more sensitive. But now, all the excuses were hollow. Her daughter was lying here, cold, without the strength to cry or tell her anything. A piercing sound cut through the air from afar, the wail of a siren and the sound of a patrol car. Jenna tilted her head, listening to the sound getting closer, like a string being tightened, then released right beside her heart. She closed her eyes for a second, squeezing her daughter's hand. Abby's breath was still there, fragile, but real. As the paramedics rushed through the door, Jenna didn't leave Abby's side for a moment. They inserted 4 lines, pushed the stretcher. She walked beside it, needing no further explanation. The phrase, "The teacher did it again," had cut a deep wound into her heart. When the police asked, she only managed to answer one sentence. If she hadn't said that, I would have thought it was low blood sugar. But now I'm not so sure. Something happened. Not today, for the first time. As the ambulance left the driveway, its lights fading, Jenna stood still for a moment in front of the house. In her heart, a new feeling was just beginning to form, a fear deeper than illness, deeper than death itself. It was the fear that her daughter had learned to endure in silence. The emergency room past midnight was as cold as a freezer compartment. Pale white fluorescent lights shone on the faint dried blood stains on the floor, the smell of disinfectant mixing with the stale odor of medicine, and the sweat of the on-call staff lingering in the thin air. Abby lay still on bed number 3, her arms straight at her sides, her small limbs stuck to the wrinkled white bed sheets. An IV needle was inserted into the back of her left hand, the IV line swaying gently each time she breathed. Jenna sat close by, her eyes swollen from crying, from tension, and from too many hours without sleep. Every time Abby frowned or moved slightly, her heart seemed to stop. A young doctor entered, nodding slightly to her. His voice was tired, but not lacking in patience. There are no internal injuries or signs of impact. Her heart rate has stabilized. He paused for a moment, then spoke more slowly. Fainting, due to severe hypoglycemia, combined with acute nervous stress. She probably hadn't eaten anything for many hours. Jenna clasped her hands together. She always takes her lunchbox to school. I prepare it every morning. Today too. She may not have eaten, the doctor said, not for physical reasons, but emotional ones. Children will sometimes refuse to eat when under psychological pressure. The statement struck Jenna like a blow, rougher than any medical diagnosis. She turned to look at her daughter, her pale face, dry lips, cheeks slightly sunken. That small body had depleted its own energy without anyone noticing. A nurse came in to change the IV drip. Jenna stood up to make way, but suddenly heard a small, whistling groan. "Mom?" Jenna leaned down immediately, her hand gripping her daughter's hand tightly. "I'm here, Abby. You're awake. I'm here." Abby's eyes fluttered open, cloudy, not yet regaining focus. She looked past her, as if trying to distinguish reality from dream. After a moment, she pursed her lips slightly, exhaling a small breath. Jenna gently asked, "Do you remember what happened?" Abby looked away. "Because I didn't finish. So, I wasn't allowed to eat." The simple answer, uttered as an obvious truth, left Jenna speechless. She started to ask more questions, but the nurse shook her head, reminding her to let her rest. About 30 minutes later, when Abby had fallen asleep again, a woman entered the room. Wearing a black jacket embroidered with the Elkridge Police Department logo, she presented her badge before speaking. I'm Kayla Monroe, Child Protective Services. I've been assigned to the case involving your daughter. The police chief notified me about tonight's call. Her voice was gentle, with the even cadence of someone who had spoken to many traumatized children. Jenna nodded, then pointed at Abby. She said, "The teacher did it again." Before she fainted, "Do you understand? She wasn't beaten, wasn't pushed around, but she was so hungry that she fainted, and she believed it was her fault." Monroe didn't take notes right away, just sat down in the opposite chair, her eyes noticeably softening. "Did you notice any unusual signs before?" Jenna hesitated, then nodded. She recounted, little by little. Some days Abby came home early saying, "I already ate." But her stomach was rumbling. Some days Jenna found a few cookie crumbs hidden in her daughter's pocket. Once, she found the lunchbox completely full, unopened, with only small fingernail scratches on the plastic surface. And the way Abby asked, "Can I eat yet?" as soon as she got out of school, as if waiting for an order from someone. "At the time, I didn't think much of it," Jenna quietly admitted. "I just thought maybe she was a picky eater." Monroe took brief notes, then asked, "Who is Abby's home room teacher?" "Paul Rivers, 3B. A slight nod, expressionless. "I need to ask you for some photos of the lunchbox, text messages, anything relevant. And if possible, tomorrow I'll go to the school to work with the principal." Jenna nodded. She didn't have enough words to describe her feelings. Her head felt foggy, as if she was floating in a real dream. Police, nurses, cold light. It was all real. But the most unbelievable part was precisely the small things she had overlooked. Near dawn, when Monroe had left, and the nurse had finished the last round of checks, Jenna dozed off for a few minutes beside Abby's bed. A light sound woke her up. Abby opened her eyes, looking up at the ceiling, whispering, "Mum?" "Yes?" "I'm here." Abby blinked, longer than usual, then turned to her. "Mum, I'm sorry." "What are you sorry for, honey?" The little girl swallowed hard, her lips pursed. A moment later, Jenna heard, as soft as a breeze, "I asked the teacher, but he said I wasn't worthy yet." The sentence was like a cold cut running down Jenna's spine. No shouting, no anger, only a dull ache spreading from her chest, pain for a child who had been taught that she wasn't qualified to be fed. She didn't answer, just hugged Abby tightly, and in that silence, the initial fear transformed. It was no longer a biological fear, no longer just because Abby had fainted, but a new kind of fear that the entire system around her daughter was teaching her to accept being abandoned as something natural. A child doesn't need to be beaten to feel pain. She just needs to believe that she isn't allowed to exist. Elkridge Elementary School greeted the morning in a veneer of artificial peace. Thin sunlight shone through the maple trees that hadn't yet lost all their leaves, pale yellow light falling on the dewy schoolyard. The sound of children cheering, running around the playground, the sound of the bell ringing for class as usual, regular, clean, and nothing suspicious. But as she walked through the hallway of the third grade area, Jenna Riley felt a different atmosphere. Here, there was no laughter, only the sound of even footsteps, the sound of chairs being pulled out neatly, and the sound of pencils tapping on desks in rhythm like soldiers. Class 3B was at the end of the row, in the left corner of the second floor. In front of the door was a wooden sign that read, "Self-respect, discipline, achievement." The three words were printed in bold, in a straight line, like the slogan of a training unit, rather than a classroom for 9-year-olds. Jenna took a deep breath and knocked on the principal's office door. Principal Carl Harmon greeted her with a social, polite, but cold smile. "I know you're very worried about Abby. We too were surprised and sorry about it. "I didn't come here to hear generalities, Mr. Harmon," Jenna said, her eyes not blinking. The girl said before she fainted that the teacher did it again. "I need to know what happened and is happening in class 3B. Mr. Harmon lightly smoothed his tie, trying to keep his voice calm. "I believe that Mr. Paul Rivers didn't do anything beyond the regulations. He is a teacher with excellent achievements who has received awards from the county. Very strict, yes, but always keeps a close eye on his students. Is it true that he has the right to take away students' lunch breaks?" A beat of silence. "No one has that right. But he has the right to ask students to complete their tasks before recess, if that is announced in advance, and with the consent of the parents." Jenna tilted her head. "I have never agreed to any form of punishment related to meals." The principal swallowed hard. "I understand. We will handle it internally. I suggest you let Abby rest for a few days to stabilize. After that, we can organize a meeting with Mr. Rivers to listen to both sides." "No, I want to meet him today. Directly." While Harmon reluctantly arranged the meeting, Jenna left the office, quietly turning into the classroom area. She stopped in front of the door of Class 3B. A teaching assistant was tidying up the bulletin board. Jenna approached. "Excuse me, I'm Abby Riley's mother. She's been hospitalized." The young woman startled slightly. "I know. Abby has been absent for a few days, but what do you need?" Jenna lowered her voice. "Can you let me talk to some of the children in the class for a few minutes?" "Not officially. I just need to hear from someone who is actually living in that classroom." The teaching assistant looked around, then nodded slightly. "Go during recess. I'll try to create an opportunity." Exactly at 10 o'clock, the bell rang for recess. The students rushed out into the yard, but Class 3B came out more slowly, more orderly. The teaching assistant waved her hand lightly, and two female students shyly stepped forward. Clara and June. "This is Abby's mom," she explained. "Her mum just wants to ask a few things. It's not required. Just say what you see." Clara glanced at June, then said softly, "Abby never gets chosen to read aloud, ma'am, even if he raises his hand for a whole minute." June continued, "Some days, she eats lunch really late, almost at the end of the break. Some days she doesn't eat at all. I saw her sitting and looking at her lunch tray, then closing it and taking it home." Jenna clenched her hand. Her voice softened. "Why doesn't Abby get to eat on time?" They both looked at each other. Clara bit her lip. "The teacher says, only students who exceed expectations get to enjoy their break properly." "What does exceed expectations mean?" June answered. "It means finishing the reading before lunch, without spelling mistakes. Sometimes you even have to read aloud to the whole class if you want to get a full break." Jenna felt like she had just swallowed an ice cube. She nodded, thanked the two girls, and left the hallway. Her footsteps were no longer steady. She returned to Class 3B when the students were already in class. The large sign on the corner of the classroom was now clearly visible. List of worthy students of the month. Below it were two columns, academic achievement and exemplary behavior. The students' names were written neatly in black marker. Each name had a gold star sticker next to it. Jenna scanned through them one by one. Liam, Clara, Travis, June. Abby's name was nowhere to be found. She looked back at the previous month's boards. Still nothing. In the corner of the room, the third seat from the right was empty. The desk and chair were still there. The battered pencil case was still lying haphazardly, but no one noticed. A student sitting at the desk above turned around, whispering, "She sits there." But the teacher often forgets to call her name when taking attendance. Jenna left the classroom, her heart as heavy as stone. She stood in the schoolyard for a moment, her eyes following up to the second-floor window, where Class 3B was continuing as if nothing had happened. Everything was too quiet, too orderly, but something was wrong. Very wrong. She turned away, walking slowly towards the school gate, her head buzzing with a relentless question. If a child is ignored every day, is it any different from being erased from the world? It rained from morning to afternoon, the small dust-like drops drawing streaky, wet lines on the glass of the Elkridge Community Library. Pale yellow light shone out through the misty windows onto the patchy sidewalk, creating a feeling that was both familiar and lost. Jenna zipped up her raincoat, stepped inside, hugging a stack of leaflets printed with blurry ink from the moisture. On each sheet, she wrote a short line. Listen to the invisible children. Parents are invited to share about your child's classroom. Location, reading room, second floor, Elkridge Community Library. Time, 6:30 p.m., Wednesday evening. No signature, no accusations. Just a quiet invitation from a mother who had lost almost everything to realize that her child was once unseen. At 6:25 p.m., the room was empty, but for Jenna. She arranged chairs in a circle around the whiteboard, put out a bottle of water and a few boxes of cookies. A friendly, safe space, she hoped. 6:31 p.m. Still no one came. 6:37 p.m. A woman in her 30s entered, soaking wet, her umbrella folded carelessly. She sat down, not saying anything. Jenna smiled lightly, offering her a glass of water. 6:42 p.m. A thin father, wearing an old down jacket, carried a small boy sleeping on his shoulder and quietly sat down. Then people began to enter, slowly, hesitantly, but not retreating. By 7:10 p.m., there were 16 adults in the small room. No one spoke first, no one interrupted, no microphone, only the atmosphere of people who had been silent for too long. A short-haired woman, wearing a business shirt, spoke first. My daughter's name is Nora. She's in Class 3A, but she used to be in Mr. Rivers' class, Class 2B last year. Nora stutters slightly, but he never called on her to speak, not even looking at her when she raised her hand. She swallowed hard, smiling faintly. At the end of the term, he told me that she is lacking in initiative, so it is very difficult to develop. Not once did he mention that my daughter had been trying to pronounce correctly every day. A silence. A middle-aged man raised his hand. His voice was hoarse, as if he wasn't used to speaking in a crowd. My child's name is Ethan. He said, if I don't get to speak, it means I'm not worth talking about. He looked down, his hands clenching his knees. I used to tell him, the teacher is probably busy. But now I'm not so sure. Some days, he cried in his room saying, Dad, at school I'm invisible. No one said anything. Jenna blinked, feeling short of breath. What she was hearing tonight was heavier than any medical report. An older mother said, her voice small, my son writes slowly. Mr. Rivers often asked him to rewrite his writing during lunch break. Every time, he brought his lunchbox home untouched. She looked up, her eyes red. I used to think, maybe he's not hungry. But what third grader isn't hungry at 12 noon? Another parent chimed in, for the first time bursting with anger. Why would any teacher think that children have to be worthy to get a break, to eat, to speak? They are human beings. They need to grow up, not be evaluated step by step like a hurdle race. After an hour and a half, the room was no longer a meeting. It was like a confessional, not because anyone was wrong, but because everyone had been silent for too long. Jenna didn't take notes, didn't interrupt. She just listened, nodded, and occasionally wiped her eyes. She remembered every small sign Abby had. The untouched lunchbox, the eyes looking down when asked, "Can I eat yet?" When no one wanted to say anything more, she stood up, walked to the whiteboard, picked up a pen. Slowly, she wrote, "Not every child needs praise, but all need to be seen." She put down the pen, turned around, her voice soft as a whisper. Abby was never named. Not on the honor roll, not in class, not even during attendance. I used to think she had to try harder. But perhaps the only thing she needed was for someone to look her in the eye and call her name, as a person who truly exists. No one applauded. No one breathed heavily. Only a mother quietly nodded. A father bowed his head, covering his eyes. A child in his arms suddenly stirred slightly. The flame began to burn, not brightly, but surely, a flame born from ashes. On Monday morning, Elkridge Elementary School unexpectedly had visitors. A dark grey SUV parked quietly in front of the administrative area. Two people got out of the car. A short-haired woman wearing a charcoal-colored blazer, holding a file. The other was a district-level inspector from the Howard County Board of Education. The visit was unannounced, but not without reason. 3 days earlier, Jenna had sent a 12-page report with testimonials from parents and a recording of the library meeting. The report was sent simultaneously to the school's principal, the Child Welfare Office, and the Board of Education's Internal Investigation Department. In it, there was a line printed in bold: "Excluding children from the right to lunch, for any reason, is a violation of human dignity, especially when children are forced to think that they are not worthy of a meal." Class 3. B was still in session as usual. Paul Rivers, a man in his 50s with carefully combed hair and a perfect voice, was lecturing on persuasive writing to his students. The whiteboard was clean, the lesson plan was presented in detail, the children were sitting upright, their hands folded on their desks. The inspector sat at the back of the class, quietly taking notes. Nothing was wrong, no shouting, no coercion. Everything ran smoothly, like a pre-programmed program. But Jenna knew. The cold wasn't in the way he lectured. It was in the space between the eyes that didn't dare to leave the page, in the furtive look when a student made a spelling mistake and quickly erased it. When the lunch bell rang, the students left the class one by one. Jenna stood at the end of the hallway, watching. Everyone left, except for 4 children. 4 of them remained seated, not talking, not eating, not moving. A girl sat at the table near the window, her hair tied to the side, her hand on a plastic lunchbox that had become slightly discolored over time. Jenna approached, bending down. "What's your name?" "Ella." "Aren't you going to eat lunch?" "Ella no miro arriba." She shook her head slightly. "I'm not worthy yet." Jenna held her breath. "Who told you that?" She hesitated. "The teacher doesn't need to say it. It's just, I haven't done the writing assignment correctly." "I know." Jenna's hand gently placed on the edge of the table. The tips of her fingers were icy. Another child, a dark-skinned boy sitting in the back row, suddenly said softly, "If I eat without the teacher's permission, he says I have no morals." The statement echoed through the empty classroom like a cut. No loud volume, no resentment, just something they believed, and had believed for a long time. Jenna turned to the inspector, who was taking notes continuously. No one needed any more words. In the afternoon of the same day, Jenna returned to the hospital. Abby was sitting propped up against the pillows, folding paper origami. Her hands trembled slightly, each fold not as accurate as before. But she was still trying, still wanted to make a paper crane as she used to. Jenna sat down beside the bed. They didn't talk right away. There was only the rustle of paper and the sound of Jenna's heart beating loudly in her chest. After a moment, Abby spoke. "Mom." "At class. Does anyone remember me?" Jenna looked up. meeting her daughter's eyes. Not expecting, just simply wanting to know. A question that didn't demand anything, except the truth. She didn't answer right away. She didn't want to lie, that everyone was talking about her. She also couldn't say that she had been forgotten. Instead, Jenna pulled Abby into her arms, hugging her tightly. "It's okay. From now on, the whole world has to remember you. Remember your name correctly. Remember your seat correctly. Remember even the way you fold paper cranes with one hand." Abby rested her head on her shoulder, not asking anything more. But Jenna knew. Starting today, she was no longer invisible. And if the system had made her disappear, then she would bring the light back with all that was left in her. That evening, Jenna received a reply email from the Board of Education office. "We have received the report and conducted an independent review. Forms of education that cause children to underestimate their self-worth are unacceptable. Temporary suspension of teaching for teacher Paul Rivers will be considered within 48 hours. Jenna read to the end of the letter, put down the phone, her hand still not leaving the screen. Outside the window, rain was still falling quietly, each drop as if washing away the invisible layer of dust covering something that seemed very small, the right to have lunch. But she knew, for Abby, for Ella, for Ethan, and for so many other children, it was the right to exist. Della's Brew, on the corner of Riverside, was quieter than usual on a drizzly March afternoon. Outside, water dripped from the eaves in thin drops, leaving streaks on the misty window panes. The inside was warm, the smell of cinnamon lingering in the air. But Jenna Riley sat as if glued to her chair, her hands wrapped around a cold coffee cup. Kelly Marsden arrived 7 minutes late. She entered hesitantly, the folded umbrella dripping water on the floor. The young teaching assistant, who had briefly appeared in the hallway of Class 3B, today wasn't wearing a school jacket, no name tag, just Kelly. She sat down, took off her gloves, not speaking right away. Jenna started first. "I didn't call you here to accuse you. I just want to understand." Kelly looked down at the tea she had just ordered, then looked up, her eyes not blinking. "I know." After a moment, she spoke softly, her voice even as if reading from a manual. "We are asked not to interfere with Mr. Rivers's teaching methods. Specifically, do not remind, do not modify, do not interfere when he is instructing students." "Who asked you to?" Kelly hesitated. "Principal Harmon. There is an internal document, not public, but all assistants are reminded of it when they take the class. Anyone who doesn't like it can switch to another grade level. Have you ever tried to object?" "I once wrote an internal report when I saw a girl crying because she was being starved in the middle of class. I wrote that she should be allowed to eat lunch regardless of her academic progress. The following week, I was transferred to administrative support for half a day." She shrugged, smiling wryly. "They call it a soft transfer." Jenna sat still, her head seething. She took out her phone, typing quickly a few keywords. "Carl Harmon, Paul Rivers, Elkridge Teachers College, class of 1990 to 1994. The results came up, a blurred photo from an old newspaper article in which Harmon and Rivers stood side by side at graduation. Graduated together, same time. In the photo, Rivers smiled faintly, while Harmon stood behind, his hand on his shoulder like a protector. Jenna continued to search further. Through local archived news, she found 2 cases of students being suddenly transferred out of Rivers' class in the last 3 years. Reason for withdrawal: not suited to current learning methods. No lawsuits, no disputes. She wrote down the parents' names. One name stood out: Sharon Delacroix, a mother who had written a sharing article about passive violence in elementary school a year ago. after which the article was removed from the school's website. Jenna followed up on the contact information, taking almost 2 hours to connect. Sharon answered the phone in a dry voice. "I didn't think anyone would dare to call back because of that. I'm Abby Riley's mother. She's in the hospital with hypoglycemia after not being allowed to eat lunch on time for many days. Also, a student in class 3B. A silence. I understand. I used to think my child was too sensitive. But then, she said that if she didn't finish the describe the object assignment, she wouldn't be allowed to go to the bathroom during class. Did you report it to the school? Yes. They said they would clarify, then never contacted me again. I withdrew my child from the school 3 weeks later. Why didn't you speak out? I tried. They said, parents are slandering the school. Then an old classmate of my husband's, also on the board, said privately, it's best to leave it alone if you don't want your child's name to be associated with the word troublemaker forever. Sharon's voice dropped. They don't need to speak loudly. They just need to suggest the right place, and everyone will retreat on their own. That evening, Jenna sent a letter requesting a copy of Elkridge School's internal regulations under the name of a parent. She received a response after 48 hours, a long set of documents, mostly familiar rules, classroom rules, teacher rights and responsibilities, behavior modification policies. But at the end of section 3.4, page 17, there was a small paragraph that she stopped at. Teachers may apply non-violent behavior modification methods to students, appropriate to the characteristics of each class, to maintain an effective learning environment. A sentence that was open, vague, and just enough so that no one could be specifically accused, but also enough so that all forms of abandonment, isolation, and psychological pressure could be considered reasonable adjustments. Jenna printed that paragraph, pasted it on the workboard in the living room, under the line she had written after the parent meeting. Not every child needs praise, but all need to be seen. And now she knew who had chosen not to look. At the end of that day, Jenna sat beside Abby's bed, watching her fall asleep after her first physical therapy session. The night light cast a glow on Abby's forehead, white and thin, but still intact. Jenna whispered softly, I know now. This fight isn't just for you anymore, but for all the children who have never had their names called correctly. The large meeting room of Elkridge Elementary School was fully lit on a cold, rainy November evening. The lights on the ceiling shone down on rows of brown, painted wooden seats, where more than 50 parents sat packed together, holding bags, raincoats, some even holding printed programs. School board meeting, November. Principal Carl Harmon sat at the head of the board table, looking calm, his tie neatly fastened. To his left was a representative from the Howard County Board of Education. To his right were 2 veteran teachers. At the end of the table, in a dark grey suit, Teacher Paul Rivers sat quietly, his hands crossed in his lap, his eyes still. Jenna sat in the third seat from the end, next to Sharon and some other parents she had met at the community library. On Jenna's lap was a blue notebook, the edges worn, Abby's diary. Her hand gently placed on the cover, her head bowed, as if preparing to step into a deep, cold water. The first 15 minutes of the meeting passed in procedure: budget reports, sports field repair updates, calls for Christmas season volunteers. No one mentioned Class 3B, not a line about Abby. Then the moderator's voice rang out. There is a free speaking from parents section in the last 20 minutes. If anyone wants to share, please come forward. No one stood up right away. Jenna looked down at the notebook, her hand open to the page with the scribbled writing in pencil. I hate Tuesdays, because it's the day I don't get to eat, because Tuesday is the day the teacher looks past me 3 times without calling me. I think, if I don't speak, don't raise my hand at the right time, then I'm not there anymore. She stood up. The sound of the chair being pulled back was soft, but searing. She walked to the middle of the room. No one applauded. No one stopped her. Only the light shone down on Jenna's shoulders as she placed the notebook on the speaking platform. Her voice broke from the first sentence. I'm Jenna Riley, mother of Abby Riley, a student in class 3B. The meeting room was silent. My daughter is still recovering in the hospital with hypoglycemia and exhaustion. She once said, I'm sorry, Mom. I'm not worthy to have lunch. I thought it was a hallucination. But then, I read her diary. The room was so quiet that you could hear a sigh coming from the 4th row. Jenna tightened the cover of the notebook, her eyes sweeping across the room. Do you know how many children are feeling like they don't exist, just because they're not good enough, according to some vague standard set by adults? A man raised his hand from the middle row. He stood up, slightly sharply. I'm sorry, but this is a child's words, in a diary. There is no specific evidence that Abby was treated differently. Jenna didn't react, but from the left row, Sharon stood up. My name is Sharon Delacroix. My daughter used to be in class 2B with Mr. Rivers. She was forced to redo the assignment during lunch, denied going to the bathroom if she hadn't completed her performance. I didn't record it, but I withdrew her from the school, and I haven't seen her cry for fear of class since then. Another parent, Mr. Wallace, Ethan's father, also stood up. My child once said, in class not being seen is not existing. I thought he was talking nonsense. Now I know he was trying to alert me. No one interrupted them. Then a young voice rang out from the left of the platform, where the student council sat. I'm Talia, class 8A, representing the student council. Everyone turned around. Talia, a slender girl, her curly hair tied high, was standing, her eyes red. I used to be a student in Mr. Rivers' class. I got high scores. I used to think I deserved the praise. But I also saw a friend sitting next to me hungry and looking down for 30 minutes, with no one asking. Her voice trailed off. I don't need more points. We need to be seen as human beings. There were sobs somewhere. There was a slight shifting of chairs. No one spoke out in protest anymore. Principal Harmon kept his face cold, but Mr. Rivers slightly tilted his head, his eyes looking at Jenna. I have never forbidden anyone from eating lunch. I just teach them to understand the value of discipline, self-motivation, and deserved achievements. He looked around the room, his voice low and even. No one forced them to be silent, but I believe students need to be taught that not all rights are free. Jenna raised her head, her eyes not leaving him. But you don't have the right to make children feel like they don't deserve lunch. The entire auditorium fell silent. Concluding the statement, the representative from the County Board of Education stood up, his voice firm. Based on the available reports, testimony from parents and students, we will conduct an independent investigation with support from a third party. During this time, teacher Paul Rivers will be suspended from teaching duties until the verification process is complete. There was a stir. Some people nodded. A few people clapped softly, not with joy, but like a sigh of relief after too many months of living in doubt, fear. Jenna stepped down from the platform, still holding the old diary. She didn't smile, didn't gloat, just felt a little lighter, because today, a small voice had echoed through a large room, and for the first time in a long time, no one dared to ignore it. November gradually passed, bringing with it winds as sharp as razors, scraping across the eaves of Jenna's house every morning. But inside the small kitchen at the end of Grant Street, the golden light from the ceiling lamp was still enough to drive away the cold, at least in the 2 square meters around the dining table. Abby had been home for 6 days. She was still thin, her upper arms loose under her woolen sleeves, but her cheeks had returned to a rosy color, and her eyes, although sometimes still evasive, were no longer as cloudy as glass soaked in cold water. Jenna prepared lunch: chicken and mushroom soup, cheese sandwiches, and a box of grapes. Abby sat at the table, intently drawing, her hands still clumsy, but each stroke running steadily. On the table, a messy box of crayons and a child's scissors lay tilted. After a moment, Abby looked up. "Mom, can I eat yet?" Jenna, who was scooping soup, stopped her hand. Then she turned around, smiling gently. "You don't need to ask, Abby. This is our home. You eat whenever you feel hungry." Abby nodded, but Jenna noticed that she still hadn't opened her lunchbox. Her hand was fidgeting with the corner of the napkin, her mouth pursed slightly, as if waiting for another signal. An official nod, a look of permission. Jenna didn't rush her. She poured a glass of warm water, put it next to her, and simply sat down opposite her, eating in silence with her. After a few minutes, Abby cautiously removed the lid of the box, picking up a piece of sandwich to try, just a small bite, as if afraid of being caught. She ate slowly, occasionally looking up at her mother, her eyes anxious, as if testing her reaction. Jenna just smiled, then asked softly, "Is the sandwich tasty today?" Abby nodded, this time a little faster. A crumb of cheese stuck to the corner of her mouth, and Jenna reached out and dabbed it lightly, that small gesture making her eyes light up. In the afternoon, Lana, a third-year education student volunteering as a tutor, came to the house. The girl had bright brown dyed hair, wore round glasses, and always carried a canvas bag printed with a sleeping cat. Lana didn't teach by the book. She talked to Abby through watercolors, through handmade stickers, and the game Find the Word in the Picture. Abby didn't talk much, but for the first time she laughed out loud when Lana pretended to mistake the fox for a dog. The kitchen wall began to fill with paintings. Jenna used paper tape so as not to peel the paint. Each drawing was a tiny piece of soul being sewn back together. Besides painting, Lana started helping Abby practice rewriting the letters. She didn't make Abby write long rows. Instead, each session, Abby only wrote one single letter, but it was the letter she chose. One session, Abby chose the letter M. Lana asked why. She whispered, "Mom." The next day, Abby chose the letter F. Jenna guessed fox. Gradually, each letter appeared in the corner of the paper. M, F, A, H. Not forming words, but forming something important to Abby, something that only she understood. Lana called it Abby's alphabet and pasted it next to the drawing, creating a space of her own, where all spelling mistakes were forgiven. One day, Jenna was washing dishes when Abby ran up, holding a picture with both hands. "Mom, can I stick it on the fridge?" "Of course." The drawing was a simple scene, a girl sitting eating lunch. On the left was a long-haired mother. On the right was an orange fox smiling broadly. On the table were bread, soup, and grapes. In the corner of the picture, Abby wrote, "I get to eat." "And Mom smiles too." Jenna looked, her throat tightening. She stuck the painting on the refrigerator door, right next to the heart-shaped magnet that had peeled paint. "You know what? You draw very well. I think this painting should be kept forever." Abby smiled, then turned back to the drawing table. But when Jenna opened the drawer to put away the towel, she found an old painting, crumpled, the paper folded in 4, the edges smudged with pencil. She opened it. Her heart skipped a beat. A girl was sitting under the table. No face, no chair. On the table was a lunchbox, crossed out with 2 strong lines. In the left corner was a small line, If I'm slow, I don't get to eat. If I don't get to eat, I have to sit under the table. If I cry, the teacher won't look. Jenna sat down on the chair, her hand clenched. A burning sensation rose in her eyes. But she took a deep breath. This was not the time to cry. This was the time to continue being there. That evening, after reading stories, Jenna stroked Abby's hair when she was lying still in bed. The night light cast a golden light on the paper cranes hanging from the ceiling. Lana had taught Abby to fold them, then hung them up like stars. Abby turned over, looking at her mother. "Mom, what is it, honey? If I learn slowly, will you stop loving me?" A simple question. Gentle. But for Jenna, it was as if someone had reached out and squeezed her heart, tightening. She didn't rush to answer. She leaned closer, whispering into Abby's forehead. "You can learn slowly for as long as you need. You can make as many mistakes as you want. But there is one thing that never changes." Abby's eyes widened. "What is it, Mom?" "That Mommy loves you, and you never need to be good enough to be loved." Abby was silent for a moment, then nodded, closing her eyes. The blanket pulled up to her chin, her breath light as the sound of leaves touching the door. Jenna sat for a while longer, looking at her daughter. On the bedside table, the colored pen was still uncapped. She capped it, then quietly stepped outside. In the kitchen, Abby's painting was still stuck on the refrigerator door. The fox smiling, the mother beside her, and the girl sitting eating lunch. Jenna took out her phone, photographed the painting, then saved it under a simple name: First Lunch. Not because it was Abby's first real meal, but because for the first time, she didn't ask anyone for permission to eat. And for the first time, Jenna thought, maybe, just maybe, from here, everything would be different. Not easy, but different. Official information from the Howard County Board of Education was sent to parents on Tuesday morning. The title was simple, unadorned. Announcement of the internal investigation conclusion regarding teacher Paul Rivers, Class 3, B. Conclusion: no physical abuse, not enough evidence for allegations of deliberately starving students. However, and this is what made Jenna stop her hand during breakfast, he was given an official administrative reprimand, suspended from teaching for 6 months, and forced to participate in mandatory educational psychology training, with stricter end-of-term test standards than before. No public warning, no lost job ending as many people had hoped. But Jenna just nodded slightly. Not happy, not disappointed, just felt enough. Because in those 6 months, there would be children who were seen. At noon the same day, Jenna went to Elkridge School by appointment to discuss reorientation for Abby, a meeting with the new teacher and the support team. On the way to the parking lot, she suddenly heard a clanging sound from behind the administrative area. A familiar figure was crouching down carrying boxes of books from the teacher's office. Paul Rivers. No tie, no tidy jacket. He wore a wrinkled grey shirt, his hands covered in chalkboard dust. He stood up when he saw Jenna. No panic, nor avoiding her. Jenna approached the distance enough to hear, but not close enough for anyone to mistake as friendship. She looked at him for a few seconds, then asked, as softly as if asking herself, "Did you ever see the girl? Or just see the grade?" Paul didn't answer right away. His face twitched slightly. He looked down at his hand, where a streak of white chalk dust was. He brushed it off quickly, as if he could wash away something, then said softly, almost a whisper, "I used to think I was fair. Each score was proof. But now I think back. I can't remember Abby's eyes, just remember the wrong words in the verb conjugation exercise." Then, from his inside pocket, he took out a piece of paper folded in 4 and gave it to Jenna. His hand trembled slightly. He said, "There are some mistakes that are not in the teacher's guide, I was going to send this, but then I didn't dare. Jenna opened it. The handwriting was slanted, written in blue ink. Not formal, not apologetic, just a few simple lines. I used to think discipline was fairness. But fairness is not doing the same thing, but understanding each child. I didn't understand Abby. I'm sorry. PR. Jenna folded it up, not saying anything. She took the letter, then turned and walked away, leaving Paul standing in the cold, sunny courtyard next to the unfinished boxes of books. The wind blew through the hallway, sweeping a note off his hand, rolling towards the empty classroom door. Paul didn't leave right away. He stood there for a long time, then placed his hand on the classroom door, a door that was no longer open to him. A week later, in Class 3B, now officially under the authority of the substitute teacher, there was a small but noticeable change. When it came time for presentations, a black-haired girl, who had always sat at the back of the class, was called by name for the first time. She stammered a few words, her face flushed, but no one laughed. The whole class listened in silence. The teacher smiled, placing her hand on the girl's shoulder when the presentation was over. Another boy, who had never raised his hand, was invited to read a passage aloud for the first time. His voice trembled, but his eyes were bright. Abby's name, still on home study, appeared on the class board, posted in the corner, "Every day a good thing." Abby drew Lana, a smiling fox. The corner of the classroom also had a small sign saying "Quiet Corner," where the children could leave their feelings in drawings or symbols. A child who had a hard time speaking drew a crooked smiley face, then stuck it on there. The teacher didn't ask, just drew a bigger smiley face next to it. And for the first time, a new slogan was written on the classboard, not by the teacher, but by a student. "I don't need to be the best, I just need to be heard." Principal Carl Harmon submitted his resignation 2 weeks later. The official reason, personal reasons, needing time to take care of his family. But no one really asked more closely. The replacement was Ms. Marianne O'Connell, a 5th grade teacher who had been ridiculed by Rivers for lack of student discipline. Her first meeting with teachers, Jenna heard back through an internally circulated recording, "No child is wrong. Maybe they need guidance, but no one needs to be invisible to learn how to exist." That evening, when Abby was asleep, Jenna took Rivers' letter from her pocket. She looked at it for a long time. She didn't burn it, didn't publicize it, didn't post it anywhere, just simply stuck the piece of paper behind the refrigerator door, right next to the drawing of the smiling fox and the line Abby had written, "I get to eat. And Mum smiles too. Not to forgive, not to forget. Just to remember that. Sometimes silence is also a voice, if we know how to listen." A year passed. May in Elkridge came slowly but warmly, the sun as if softening because it knew how many small faces were waiting for it to rise to start the year-end school festival. The schoolyard was colorful, with flags and drawings, paper garlands hanging from the windows on the 2nd floor. On the makeshift stage, the teacher was adjusting the microphone. Parents gathered around the long rows of plastic chairs, holding cameras in one hand, hot coffee cups in the other. Jenna sat in the 3rd row, amidst a crowd murmuring voices and the wind. She wore a white shirt, her hair neatly tied, her eyes not leaving the small stage in front. Today was the first day Abby read poetry in front of a crowd. Not poetry by heart, not a school sample, but a poem that the students had written themselves, entitled "Why I Learn Slowly." Each student one verse, each child one voice. Some spoke quickly, some stammered, some had to look at the paper all the time. No one laughed, no one was urged on. When it was Abby's turn, the space seemed to fall silent for a beat. The girl wore a striped purple plaid dress, her hair braided on both sides. Her new glasses were bigger and rounder. Jenna could clearly see her hand trembling slightly when she held the paper, but her eyes, those eyes were no longer evasive. Abby took a deep breath, then read, each word, slowly and clearly. I learn slowly, because I think long, because I want to be sure that I understand what she says. I learn slowly, but I'm also hungry, and everyone needs to eat when they're hungry. The wind gently swept through the schoolyard, carrying the smell of drawing paper, the smell of damp grass, and a hint of cookies from the student food stalls. Jenna looked around, seeing a father holding his child's hand tightly, a mother taking a tissue to quickly wipe away tears. No one said anything, but many eyes were red, not with pity, but with seeing their own child, seeing themselves in Abby's slow and steady voice. Then bursts of applause filled the void. Jenna didn't clap, she just cried. Very softly, her hands clenched on her lap, her eyes blurred following her daughter's smile. After the program, the students rushed out into the yard like a flock of small birds. Abby didn't run as quickly as her friends. She walked towards Jenna, her cheeks flushed red from the sun or from pride. Jenna wasn't sure. Abby looked up, tugging lightly at her mother's sleeve. I'm not hungry, but Mom, let's have lunch. Jenna nodded. She didn't ask now, or why eat so late, like she might have done years ago. She just took out the lunchbox she had prepared that morning, egg sandwiches, sliced apples, and strawberry pie. Then both found a spot on the stone bench behind the library. The sun slipped through the young maples, leaving soft shadows on the lawn. Abby opened the box, arranging each item like a familiar ritual. After a moment, Ella, the girl in her class, who used to be one of the 4 children forced to sit back at lunchtime, slowly walked over. Abby looked at her friend, then looked up and asked her mother, Mom, can I invite my friend to eat with us? Jenna smiled. You don't need to ask permission. Ella se sentó, sus manos colocadas en su regazo como si tuviera miedo de hacer algo mal. Abby split the cake in half, put one half on a paper towel, and pushed it towards her friend. Ella took the piece of cake, hesitating for a few seconds, then took a very small bite, as if waiting for a reaction. Nothing happened. No one reminded. No one recorded the mistake. Ella looked up at Abby, and both burst into giggles, laughter that wasn't loud, but enough to make Jenna shiver. For the first time in a long time, the children's laughter in this schoolyard was not adjusted by a reminder to be quiet so as not to disturb other friends. The 3 sat eating. No music, no slogans, no titles. Only the sound of chewing, the sound of whispering, and no one had to wait to be allowed. On the sunny red brick background, Jenna watched Abby smile. Not the forced smile as before, but a natural, clear smile, as if the cracks in her heart had begun to heal. She turned away, blinking. Not to hide her tears, just to keep that moment for a long time. After a moment, Jenna bowed her head, whispering softly, not sure if Abby could hear, I'm sorry for not seeing sooner that empty look that day. Abby looked up. The wind blew through her hair. Her eyes were sparkling, but calm. You see it now? Jenna laughed, laughing and crying. Her hand stroked the child's hair, then touched her cheek. Nothing else was said, and it didn't need to be. At home, behind the door of the old refrigerator, Paul Rivers' handwritten letter was still there, next to the drawing of the smiling fox. The drawing had faded from the moisture, but the expression of the girl in the picture, Abby's face, was still intact, eating, smiling, looking straight ahead. Jenna had once planned to put the drawing in a glass frame, but then she stuck it back in its original place, next to the cold compartment containing milk and strawberries, where Abby used to reach for every morning. Because the most important thing to remember is not to display, but to live with every day. The story doesn't end with a miracle, just a child getting lunch, on time, rightfully. Sometimes, what shatters a child isn't a big wound, but the feeling of not being seen. A forgotten lunchbox, an eye that glances over, a whisper that no one answers. Enough to make them believe that they don't deserve to exist. This story has no miracles, no extraordinary characters. Just a mother who chooses not to turn away. A little girl who once asked, "If I learn slowly, will you stop loving me?" And adults who were silent are now beginning to learn how to listen. You may never have stepped into a cold classroom like that, but if you've ever felt like you had to be worthy to be cared for, ever braced yourself just not to be forgotten, then perhaps you will understand. Thank you for listening to the very end. If there is a child around you who is quieting their voice, shrinking back after being overlooked, I hope you are gentle enough to bend down and ask, "Are you hungry?" Because sometimes a timely lunch is how to begin saving a life.